Welcome to the Meyer Clinic's podcast, and you just heard a quote from one of your hosts, Dr. Lisa Day. Join our licensed clinical professionals from various backgrounds as they discuss fascinating mental health topics with a wide range of guests. Meyer Clinics is a Christian counseling organization with multiple clinics nationwide dedicated to treating the whole person, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Welcome to our listening family. We thank you for joining us. Hey everyone, this is Kristen Sunanta-Walker, host of Mental Health News Radio, and I'm here with our counselor and program director, Melanie Van. Hey, Melanie.
Hi, y'all.
And I'm here with Dr. Paul Meyer. Paul, thanks for coming back on again.
My privilege. Hi, Kristen. Hi, Melanie.
Hey, Paul.
Hey. So tonight we've had a lot of listeners lately come to me with emails asking about generational abuse and generational trauma and how in the heck do they get out of that cycle? Because man, when it's entrenched in your family, it's entrenched in your DNA is what it seems like. And I'm not the expert about this. I'll leave that to you and Melanie, but it seems like how do we get out of those patterns that are just, you could trace it back to, 1642 and it's, there as well all the way into the current day. And it just keeps happening and happening and happening and happening. And what does it take to pull out of that and strike a new life, strike a new pattern, strike a new chord so that that generational behavior stops with your generation, or at least your children's generation? So, Paul, I'm going to throw this to you to talk about that.
Well, for our listening family, I want to start with encouraging words that no matter, even if your ancestors have been doing the same thing for 3,000 years, like in some primitive places in some parts of the world, they have been, doing the same things for thousands of years and not changing. But no matter how far back your family's bad habits go back, you can make a choice. You can break free from it. People feel like they're locked into it, but you're not. And people think, I've had so many patients that thought in order to be worth anything, they had to have their mother's approval or they had to have their father's approval. And so they had to go back to the sick family of origin and kowtow and give in to what they wanted and stuff because they felt like if they were rejected, they'd be a nobody. And I remind them there's almost 8 billion people on planet Earth. Your mother's just one of them, and your dad's just one of them. And you don't need your mother's approval any more than I need your mother's approval. And you don't need your mother's approval any more than you need my mother's approval. You need to put your self-worth in your own pocket instead of putting it in her pocket or your dad's pocket or your brothers and sisters. So no matter how bad the pattern is that you grew up in, you can make the break. And sometimes that means altogether breaking off all ties with the family. In some cases, it's just making it superficial and being with them a couple hours Christmas and Easter and maybe one other time during the year for a couple hours or something, and maybe limiting the phone calls to once a month or, for 20 minutes. And if they get negative, you say, I'm going to have to hang up. If it gets negative and you hang up. And sometimes it means writing the family off altogether where you just don't spend any time with them at all.
Yeah.
And people tell me, well, if I do that, my mom will never speak to me again. And I said, well, then if you have to suffer in order for her to speak to you, you're better off without her ever speaking to you again. So just go ahead and do what you need to do and find some people that are healthy to love and be loved by. And don't give in to your family patterns.
It's so difficult. Melanie, what are your thoughts?
I mean, geez, I could write the book on this one, Kristen.
I know, you and I both, girlfriend.
Right. Because I did that, and my parents did that. We completely walked away from a very large family, in fact, which was never our intention at the beginning of the journey, but it's just what ended up happening and ended up being what a judge ruled down in court after, the cat was
out of the bag. Yeah.
Exactly, after the cat was let out of the bag. So, but I also just want to encourage our listeners too, just like Paul did, that it can happen. You are not stuck any place in your life. It does take courage. And I think one of the hardest things, what comes to mind for me, Kristen, is that when you're dealing with this transgenerational trauma in a family, if someone has been abused, then of course they are more likely to have depression, relationship difficulties, anger issues, substance abuse, anxiety. So you're already put at a mental health disadvantage when you've been abused, which makes it even harder for you to get out of abusive situation as it is.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, that's just one of the things that, spills into your inability to walk away from a family. Once again, I read, Kristen, I know you read this article because I think you shared it, another Henry Cloud article. Yay.
Yes.
And it talked about forgiveness and trust and how they're two very different things. And I think oftentimes we think that we should forgive our families, and of course we should, but forgiveness can happen with just you. It just means you have released it, but it does not mean that you trust again. Forgiving someone does not automatically imply that you trust the person again to put you through the same harm that they've put you through before. So I think that's another reason why it's hard for people just to walk away from their families. And it's just like Paul was saying, we all have a deep, deep need to be loved by our mother and father. And that is something that just is to our core. It is in our hearts. It's what we need. It's what we want. And, as a Christian, for me, I know a lot of times when, I had my parents that stood beside me and walked me through this thing, it was the rest of the family that, that we decided to walk away from. So, but there were many times where I was just like, well, it doesn't really matter because God loves me and that's all that matters. Because as long as I had that, then nothing else really mattered at that point in my life. But I can say hands down, there's no other choice that I could have made. There's no way that I could have stayed in that toxic environment. There's no way that it was not, I honestly feel saved that I was rescued out of that very bad situation. And as painful as it was, I feel liberated.
Right.
So it is possible to break the cycle and move on with your life, for sure.
It's so true. It's so hard too, because your family is supposed to be everything. It's supposed to be your safe place, your true north, your comfort zone. And when you don't have that, it's not just you feeling abandoned, like you've been shunned or you've shunned yourself. It's society telling you that as well. How dare you? I remember talking about my biological father and having someone come up in the midst of me speaking, and I was like 17 or 16 and just shaking her finger at me. How dare you speak about your father that way? And I wasn't naming him. I was just talking about the abuse I had gone through. And those ties run really deep, especially when you attach the word family to them. There's so much guilt and shame around keeping the family secret, defending your family, that you're an honorable person. If you keep that family secret, if you fight to the dog, it doesn't matter if they're beating you. As long as you defend that family secret, you're good. And it takes a lot of strength to pull out of that and, stand on your own. You're naked. You are naked in the forest when you do that. Paul, what do you think about that?
Yeah, you are. And just think about in the world, there's billions, several, 2 or 3, there's 8 billion people. There's, a couple billion or more, 2 or 3 billion, where if they even believe a different religion than their parents, then they're totally rejected or in some cases even killed.
Absolutely.
It's so hard to make the break, especially if you're in a real dominant culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And your whole persona, your whole identity is made up of your family. And it's the best thing, in my opinion, it's the best thing you can do is to develop your own identity outside of that family. Whether it's a healthy family or an unhealthy family, you still need to develop your own identity in this life. And it makes it all that much harder when you're enmeshed in mental illness, codependency, abuse, whatever it is. How do people get out of that and strike it out on their own? And really, the hardest part I've seen is, Paul, you mentioned earlier about going to a family event and knowing that you're only going to have 2 hours, how difficult it is to spend those 2 hours and not get sucked into the groove of what's going on with that family and forgetting that, nope, you need to have boundaries and you need to leave at a certain point and da-da-da-da-da. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I have a lot of patients that that are doing, they've had enough therapy where they're doing great. And then they go home for Christmas, or they visit with their family of origin, and they fall apart. And that's real common when you go to visit your family of origin and you're not with them very often. People automatically regress to the patterns of communicating and looking at life and looking at yourself and looking at others that you had when you were growing up. So you just automatically revert unless you really make an effort not to.
Yeah,
so that happens a lot.
It's very difficult because it feels so familiar. It feels so comfortable to dive right back into that behavior and those patterns. And it's only going to take a while before you go, ooh, this is uncomfortable. This is unhealthy. But it's alluring.
Now, there's a lot of people in our listening family that have, pretty nice families of origin.
Right.
And with them, there's things you can do to modify the slight things, the milder things that they've done that have been erroneous, that where they had good intentions, but they had a negative effect on you. And I'll give you a couple examples, one for my mom, one for my dad. My mom and dad were both very loving, German immigrants, and very patriotic. And I really thank God for both of them. But one thing negative that my mom would do is she would tend to pit one child against another. I was third out of four. And if I didn't do something exactly the way she wanted me to do it, she'd say, well, your sister Betty would do it that way, or Nancy always does that, or your brother Dick does that. And then that would make me feel guilty, and I'd be manipulated by guilt when I was growing up. But when I became an adult and had enough psychiatric training and maturity, then when my mom would do that, like we'd be on the phone just chatting or something, and my mom would start doing that, your sister calls me every other day. You just call me once a week, And I told her, I said, Mom, I love you very much. I love you. But whenever you pit me against the siblings, I'm going to have to hang up. And I did. And I did that.
Paul.
I only had to do that. A few times.
What did she say? What did she say when you first said that to her? What was her reaction?
She said, well, I don't know. She just made up some excuse. I don't remember what she said, but she defended herself. She didn't admit doing anything wrong. But it only took a few times of doing that where she quit doing it. And so she learned. So, we can help if we come from a healthier family, we can help them break a pattern. And then with my dad was a strict German, and he grew up in a wealthy family in Russia, actually, a German community in Russia, where his dad owned a factory, and they had 30 servants living on the quarters behind their house and all that sort of thing. But they were real strict with him, and so he was strict with me growing up. And if I got all A's and a B on my report card, he'd wonder why I got that B. You know what I mean? And so I felt like no matter what I did, it wasn't quite good enough. And so when I first finished, even though I had 3 years of psychiatry training at Duke, when I got out, I taught at a seminary, and I was still thinking that way. And I didn't have enough insight, even from all the therapy that I went through myself. And while I was teaching at the seminary, I wanted to please God. And we tend to think God is just like our earthly father, dear heavenly version. When we pray, dear heavenly Father, we're thinking, dear heavenly version of my earthly father.
Right.
And so I was seeing students and their wives for free at my home evenings, and I was doing charity work in the ghettos on Saturday mornings, and I was speaking in churches on Sunday mornings lots of times, and I was teaching full time at Trinity Seminary back then, teaching counseling, and they had a private practice in Milwaukee, and commuting back and forth. So I was just getting burned out. I was doing all these things that I thought God was calling me to do. And I was getting burned out, and I was starting to get depressed. And a buddy of mine, Frank Minirth, who I ended up going into partnership with later, he was a psychiatrist that I knew since medical school. And I called him up and said, Frank, in fact, the reason I called him is I came across a verse in the Bible where I think it's in Matthew, where it says, Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And I said, I came across that verse where Jesus said his yoke is easy and his burden is light. And I just got really ticked off at God, because my burden's not easy. It's not light. I'm doing what he's calling me to do, and I'm burning out doing it. And so I'm trying to do what my Heavenly Father wants, but it's burning me out. Frank said a wise thing to me that changed my life. He said, Paul, I think instead of obeying your Heavenly Father, you're obeying your earthly father, who you confuse with your Heavenly Father. Because if Jesus said his yoke is easy, then it is easy. So figure out what you really enjoy doing. That's easy and that's light. And quit doing all those other things. They're good things, but you can't do so many good things that you're not spending enough time with your family and not having time to have recreation and fun and things. And so I quit doing a lot of those things. and I just did a couple of them, a few of them, and at first I felt real guilty,
Right.
and then I got condemned by a few people that I quit doing things for,
Ooh.
and I had to just write that off. But within a short amount of time, I really learned to love life a lot more, doing a few things well than a whole bunch of things that I thought God wanted me to do. And so that was a negative thing that influence my dad had on me, but he had a lot of wonderful influences on me too. So, when he would say things like that, even as an adult, I would sit down with him and explain to him that why I disagreed with him. And he was defensive too, but as far as, he wouldn't admit that he did anything wrong. And yet he changed and became more and more affectionate and loving. He didn't used to give me hugs and say, I love you. When I was a kid, he would rub his whiskers on me. And that's his way of saying, I love you, but as an adult, he learned to say, I love you and give me hugs.
Mm-hmm.
And the older he got, the sweeter he got. And so when you correct family things, your parents may not admit that they've done anything wrong, but they may change. Mine changed. You can't expect them to change. You can't assume they're going to change. And in fact, sometimes they'll just outright reject you, but
Right.
But it's worth a try if they're pretty healthy.
Yeah, that's very true.
Overall.
Melanie, we've talked about that where you state what's going on with you and then they change and you're like, they enact the change and you're like, wait a minute, what alien just walked in? Wait a minute.
It's a beautiful thing when you can work through the uncomfortableness of the normal patterns that typically happen in your family and get to the other side of it. It really is beautiful, and just, there were some of the childhood wounds that I had, and I was this person that just took on responsibility for everything in the world. And my early 30s, I was having lunch with my mother one day, and we were having a heart-to-heart about, the trauma that we had all been through with our family. And she looked at me and she got teary-eyed and she said, Melanie, she was just like, please stop trying to save the world and bearing the burdens of the world. She said, I'm your mother. Let me do it for you. That is what I'm supposed to do. And that one sentence was the most healing, wonderful. I felt like it healed, 30 years of things that were just kind of backwards in my head. So yes, there are some things that really work out beautifully in families if you have a healthy parent or a healthy family member that can make some positive changes. And sometimes it does just take time, because when you start setting boundaries with unhealthy family members, there's always going to be some backlash, because the system, I think I just did a diagnostic dish on family constellations.
Yeah.
So your constellation or your system is always going to want to pull back to normal. So one of the coolest things I did in grad school was do a family constellation. So you draw this big family picture, basically, and circles are women and squares are men, and there's all these lines, and a squiggly line means abuse, a broken line means divorce. I don't remember exactly how it goes, but you can look at this family constellation and see patterns all throughout the family that try to recreate themselves. So a system is always going to try to pull itself back to where the homeostasis that it's created for itself. So you have to expect resistance when you're trying to make a change, even if it's a positive one. And if you can just sit in the resistance and hold your boundaries, sometimes it really can change things. And then, of course, sometimes it means you're probably just going to have to move on and maybe end the relationship. But Sometimes it does take time, is my point. Sometimes it just takes time.
That's true.
For people to come back around.
It's so true. And sometimes your family is just not going to be on board with you. And that's the hardest part for me, is to sit in that and be in a family gathering and know that I'm going to have to set these same boundaries again and again and again, instead of being mortified and appalled. How dare they? I told them last time.
Yep.
Realize that, nope, you're just going to have to keep saying it. You're going to have to keep saying
it.
Yeah.
That's right. And if you really wanted to change, your behavior has to really change.
Absolutely.
That's just as hard as waiting it out, because it's hard to step out of your own patterns as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it takes some work, that's for sure.
So, Paul, how do you...
if you want to know, if you and our listening family right now, if you have children, here's a little project to do. Have your kids draw a picture of your family. We do that with kids when you're treating kids. The therapist has the child draw a picture of his family. And whichever parent is considered more dominant to the child, he'll make bigger. they'll be real big and the other parent will be real small, and you'll see where he places himself or herself in the family. They may feel left out and be way to one side and the rest of the family somewhere else, or they may be the center of attention and be in the middle. If they have eyes and nose, if they have little eyes and nose, that means they feel more significant than if it's just a blank round head with no eyes. And so there's things you can learn from having them draw a picture of your family and see if you can understand some of your own dynamics that might not be quite perfect.
Oh boy, I would hate to draw the genealogy tree of my family. there'd be all this sticking it out, continued abuse, and there's this big exit sign where my mother veered off and my aunt veered off and said no more, and then we went on to like heal from that generational abuse. And just because you make an exit because the family they want to stay in their toxicity, it doesn't mean that you don't continue to perpetuate that. It just means that maybe you have hope that another generation is not going to experience some of the horror that you did,
Oh, yeah.
So, okay, when we're talking about a situation where someone is unsafe, emotionally, psychologically, even physically, in the existing family dynamic, and they have to break away, how do you begin that process of counseling to where, yes, they've left an unhealthy family system and they have a family of their own and they're forging ahead, but they're dealing with a whole lot of abandonment. Even though they abandon, quote unquote, the family, they're still dealing with abandonment issues, whether they abandon the family or the family abandoned them. How do you counsel a patient that has made that very difficult decision and get them to be confident in that and move forward, in their lives in a healthy way with their new family that they've created?
Well, the most important thing is that they have a good support group. We all need to love and be loved by people that accept us the way we are. And you don't need a lot of people. I mean, if you had just a couple of good friends that you could be yourself with and share your feelings with and share your frustrations with and things like that, it really helps to make up for not getting what you need from your family of origin.
Yeah, that's true. It's difficult every holiday. Melanie, what have you seen where, that's when those times come up, the birthday, the holiday, the Mother's Day, the Father's Day?
Yeah.
What have you seen with people and yourself, in that kind of a situation?
Yeah, those are always difficult times. I think anyone that has ever made the decision to break away from a dysfunctional family always second guesses themselves at some point. Years down the road, they may, did they do the right thing? Was it? And I think usually they come back around. But I think one piece that really is important is just processing the grief, because it is an incredible loss. It may be a situation where, it was a traumatic event. So the person may have PTSD, and that's something that needs to be worked through. Because when you have this generational trauma, and there's been all sorts of studies lately that says we do pass trauma down in our DNA. It is literally passed down to our loved ones. So when you're already dealing with all this trauma and you end this generational abuse, then of course you're going to have all these issues surrounding grief that I think are extremely important to work through. Because I know one thing that happened to me and my inability, as a 17-year-old, I lost everything. I lost my family. I lost my home. We lost where we live. We lost an inheritance. Literally a whole town just, turned their backs on us. So for me, I couldn't grieve adequately at the time because it was just such a big loss.
Right.
And so therefore, later in my life, I became afraid of losing anything else. So I would either wall myself in so I didn't have anything to lose, or I would just get in bad relationships or something. So I had this fear of grief. I just didn't think I could bear to lose anything else. I think I've talked about that before on the show. So I think it's important you walk through those feelings. what Paul said. You have to have a great support for you to build yourself up. And that's one of the things I think is so important, because I think we do identify with our families. I had a very prominent family. There's still very prominent family in that community. And so I identified as being one of those people. And that when I look physically very much like that side of the family, so there's no hiding that that's who I am. And so you really have to find your own identity and understanding and moving forward in your life and in your family and with your children. And then another piece too is just working through the trauma, because our bodies remember. That's the bottom line. There's so much denial and repression probably if you've been in this toxic situation. So just kind of unearthing all that stuff and just being diligent and understanding what it is that you've done, but then also taking this great sense of accomplishment that you have been able to stand up to this generational abuse, because that is, and consider yourself lucky. I remember thinking that myself. I would think to myself, Lord, thank you so much for giving me a mind to see that it was wrong. And I think I've shared before, Kristen, that I would sit around at these big Christmas holidays, and my grandmother's house was in Southern Living magazine, and I would sit around and I would look at everyone and I would just be like, I just don't belong here.
Right.
Like, even as a little girl, I just felt like something was wrong, and I just didn't felt like I belonged. And so I just think it's important that you create your own identity and take, I guess, pride. I hate using that word because so many people use it or think of it in a negative way, but just really feel blessed that you had the mind to not be, brainwashed into that same mentality, and really step forward and move forward in courage and do what you have to do to liberate your own life.
A relationship with God is very important too.
Yes, absolutely.
And getting to know who he is part of that, because like I said, we automatically tend to think God's like one of our parents or both of our parents. And I wrote a book called Experiencing God Outside the Box. In there, I talk about that, about how we need to pray and meditate on the Bible and do things that, and analyze, what do I think? Do I think God's mad at me whenever I do this or do that, or think this or think that? And it's good to question your beliefs. There's 8 billion people, and all 8 billion of us have a slightly different view of what God's like, which means all 8 billion of us are a little bit wrong,
Right.
But when I was a child, I decided I wanted to have a relationship with God, and when I was 10, I started meditating on the Bible a little bit every day, and I still do that most days. And when I have had struggles with identity or falling back into a family pattern or the workaholism or whatever, then that relationship with God really helped me to learn, like Melanie said, to like myself and accept myself and realize, like the Bible says, there's no condemnation. Romans 8:1 says there's no condemnation, and we can learn to live by grace, unmerited favor, and we don't have to earn acceptance or earn anything. We can have unmerited favor, and we can give that to ourselves, extend unconditional love to ourselves, and break out of the family pattern where you feel like you have to earn it.
Hi, this is Dr. Paul Meyer of the Meyer Clinics. Our Christian counselors across the country have a goal of helping all those who come to us to become what God has called them to be. If you're in a situation where you're not at peace within yourself, or you just feel like there's joy that's missing in your life, we can come alongside to help you obtain peace and joy.
This message is sponsored by the Meyer Clinic Foundation, a nonprofit Christian counseling ministry. The number is 1-888-7-CLINIC, 1-888-7-CLINIC.
Yeah, Paul, you talk about your dad, and I think that we also see it can be your mother as well. I had a incredibly understanding, loving, and kind dad that I've said many a times on the show just was my saving grace. And my mom was a very kind woman too, but she was also very, she just expected a lot. Just very type A, to the point that to this day I have a hard time just sitting down and relaxing, because in my mind I feel lazy, because that's how she sees it. And she grew up in a home with 5 brothers, and they worked for everything they ever had. So it's not only your father. I think how you think about God can be very much like your mother.
Absolutely.
However your mother treated you as well. It's your family. It's your mom and your dad. You automatically think. So I definitely kind of went through that stage of thinking, just like you did, Paul, that God just, if I had a lick of energy, I needed to put it towards serving and saving people's lives. I mean, that was just how I thought. And I finally got to the place where I realized that was not him talking. That was probably my mom talking in my head somewhere, because then I became a person that puts a lot of pressure on myself too. So it's not only daddy issues, it can be mommy issues too. I'm sure you know that too, Kristen.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. The never able to sit and just be.
Yeah.
Just read a book, just relax, just not do something. Like, you're defined by what it is you do, not who you are. It's a very difficult cross to bear. It certainly can motivate you to constantly, to be very successful, because, you never sit still. You're always doing something, but it doesn't exactly lead to happiness.
I agree.
And I think a lot of that can stem from, if you've had, childhood abuse, you grow up thinking that there is something inherently wrong with you. So that constantly doing is proving, catering to the unhealthy parent or parents is a lifestyle that becomes your way of being the, the one that can fix the problems, make them happy, walk on a tightrope while balancing 8,000 plates and never a plate drops. And, it sets you up to be very successful in some respects, but it also sets you up to be very unhappy later in life. So, Paul, what do you think about that piece?
Yeah, totally. The parents who expect too much out of their kids tend to become perfectionists themselves and be hard on themselves, because whatever you learn, 85% of our personality is formed by our 6th birthday. Now, thank God, we can change no matter how old we are. But if people who are perfectionistic achieve the most, like you mentioned earlier, Kristen, they achieve the most in life and they're successful and financially successful, but they enjoy it the least. And so people that are a little bit more hang loose, that still achieve things, but they're a little bit more balanced and nicer to themselves, they may not achieve quite as much as the perfectionist who's a type A workaholic, but they'll enjoy what they do achieve a lot more.
Yeah, it's interesting, because when you're a child of someone like that, you grow up, you've been sheltered and protected because your parents showed you the way. They were a way shower of, I am not going to allow my child or myself anymore to accept this abuse. But that same pattern of behavior around never letting go, never letting anyone rest, that is its own perpetuation of unhealthy behavior. So that is where I think, it can continue on through the generations. I can say that I'm proud that my son, as an example, did not experience sexual abuse. So yay, it stopped at my generation, but he still has a whole lot of issues from me being his mother and the after effects of my trauma and my untreated trauma that played out through his childhood.
Oh, yes. That's how it's passed down, for sure.
And we'll see how that plays out with his own having children. I've told him, honey, whatever therapy you need, whatever you need to say to me, I accept it and I bring it. Because, I mean, one of the sweetest things that he said to me was, my God, Mom, the older that he's gotten and the more life experiences that have been thrown at him, he said, I don't know how you did it. I don't know how you raised me with all the mental illness that you were dealing with. And on one hand, I think, oh, that's sad. But on the other hand, I'm so happy for him that he's that wise that he can see that. There's not as much anger at me from him because he can look back and go, she really did the best she could.
What's really cool to me is just thinking about you two right now, Kristen and Melanie, you both suffered a lot of trauma growing up, and yet look at who you are now because of choices that you've made and help that you've sought. And, you're both just wonderful people that I really love you both. And you're caring, you're compassionate, you're doing this radio program as an act of love to our listening family, and you're trying to be good parents, and you're admitting when you're not. Look at, sometimes having a real traumatic life experience can mature you into somebody that you never would have been if you would have grown up in a quote unquote perfect family.
That's so true. So true.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I know. I always say Melanie is like my ballast. So when I'm off the rails, I'll call her, and we have the same wounds that I can go to her and she'll be like, okay, there's some cognitive dysfunction here. You're doing this or that. And I don't take it personally. Whereas if somebody else said that to me, I just might.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's the importance of having good relationships where you, just like Paul was saying, where you can really be yourself and really show your vulnerabilities. And, it has been no easy path. I can attest to that. There's been lots of sadness, but I tell you, there is not one piece that I would take back. I mean, I feel like my life is beautiful and the relationships I have are so dear to me. And so that's just one more thing for our listeners to just, I know it may seem so dark right now and like you could never get out or never have a different life than you're living right now. But, Kristen and I and Paul too, Paul's been through his own things. You can move on and have a life of your own that has meaning. And when you're contributing to the world, because that is not what, was meant for us. So I just, want to encourage people that you don't stay in that place forever. It may feel like you're never going to get out, but if you just hang in there, it's certainly possible to have a free life of your entire past. I can honestly say that.
Yeah.
I feel completely free from it. And that is a wonderful feeling. I have so much gratitude for just having that feeling in general. So it can happen.
Absolutely.
Glad you brought that up. The meaning in life is something that a lot of people don't look at. When you ask the young millennials nowadays, what's your purpose in life? A lot of them look astonished, like they hadn't really ever thought of that before. And a lot of them say to enjoy today, whatever it takes to enjoy today. And even if it's drugs or whatever, or taking advantage of other people sexually or whatever. And if you live a life that's selfish, you're sure not going to enjoy it. And really the healthiest thing you can do, the most selfish thing you can do in life in a healthy way is to dedicate your life to God and help in being a benefit to mankind. And in the morning I pray, God, please help me to become more like you today and help me to be useful to you today. When I see my patients and go through the day, help me to be useful. And it's not like that's all I want to do is serve all day, every day. I mean, I enjoy friendship and laughing and watching funny movies and things with my wife and all that sort of thing. But I want to become a more mature, loving person each day. And that helps because, like, for example, today, just a little thing went wrong. I got home from work today and my wife got home and our TV broke, Well, that's not a major crisis, but, it's since we spent so much time watching TV, I hate to admit, I was really disappointed. I was really upset at first. And I thought, no, wait a minute, didn't you pray just this morning that you'd become more godly? And the Bible says tribulation works patience. And so when things go wrong, it's really good for me. The Bible says rejoice even in your tribulations. So even when things go wrong in your life, God can use those to help you become a better person. And I'm thankful now that the TV broke because that's better for me than if I go through life expecting nothing to go wrong. And so even if you have a major crisis in your life, you can grow from it and learn from it. And if you have that attitude, it helps you not to get depressed. It helps you as I go through life when things do go wrong. I think, okay, well, that's part of, what life is about is, like Job went through a lot of suffering and he said, and his wife, told him, just curse God and die, And he said, what? Shall I expect good things from God and not also expect adversity? So we need to expect adversity, expect things to go wrong in our lives sometimes.
Yes, I totally agree. And Paul, you talk about how, things can grow you or how things can change or not, getting, I guess, caught up in your service of what you're doing. It's taken me quite a while. My autistic son is now 5. And before he was born, I spent a lot of time counseling and volunteering and doing things for friends. And I just love doing those things, grooming my horses, whatever. I've just always been one of those people that love doing those things. And now I don't do any of those things anymore. I'm primarily home with my son. And of course I do the show when I work with Kristen, which is very rewarding. But for the most part, I don't do anything like that anymore. So I really, and I can honestly say I got a lot of self-esteem from that. Still caught up in that doing and not being. So I've really just kind of had to reformulate where I get my esteem from as a person. And it's definitely made me grow and just learn how to be a lot stronger just sitting in my own. And of course, I mean, my son just deserves every little lick of attention I can give him. And he is certainly so appreciative of it. And his smiles are worth every moment. But it does it. So any situation that you face in life, you can be used for a positive change. I mean, there's a Bible verse about that, Paul, as well. So
aren't you going to quote it, Melanie? Come on, Paul. Can
Yeah, what is it, Melanie? Which one?
Well, I mean, basically, isn't it like Romans? God works all things for good for those who.
Oh yeah, Romans 8:28.
8:28, yeah.
I was going to tell you, if you can think of the verse,
Hold it out.
you can think of the verse. I'll tell you where it's found. My dad used to actually play that game with us when we were growing up. He'd hand us a Bible and he would turn his back the other way, and we would just open it up at random and read a verse, and he would tell us where it was found.
Oh
That's
man,
how much he studied the Bible.
Wow.
Plus, he was
hilarious.
pretty smart too.
Yeah. That's so funny.
Well, it's so true. It's very difficult. Your identity gets enmeshed with your family. It gets enmeshed with your kids. It gets enmeshed in so many things. And then you figure out later in life, usually, well, what exactly is my identity? Who am I? Who am I when I'm not serving others? And I'm so selfish that I would serve myself. And boy, are you going to hear your family telling you that you are selfish when you stop serving their needs.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hey,
yeah.
that reminds me of something.
Yeah.
That reminds me of something, Kristen. I've had patients before numerous times come in my office just bawling and crying, and I've said, well, what are you crying about? And they've said, I just can't figure out who I am. And I tell them, it doesn't really matter who you are. They say, what do you mean? They think I'm insulting them, and I'm really not. I'm just setting them up. I said, it doesn't really matter who you are. Who do you want to be?
Right.
Yeah.
Because people think that they cry because of who they are, because they think who they are depends on their family of origin, the things that they've learned about themselves growing up, and the things they've learned about men and women and marriage and all those things growing up. And it doesn't really, I mean, it's nice to figure out who we have been. It doesn't hurt to do that in therapy, to gain insight into those things. But the most important thing is that who do you want to be? You can become whoever you want to become by insight, loving and being loved, prayer, just searching your soul, making redecisions, making new decisions. And, look at Melanie and Kristen, and they had to make they made unhealthy decisions when they were young little kids, because that's what anyone would do, if growing up like that. As you grew older and more mature and worked on things, you made what we call redecisions. You redecided in a different direction.
And without a lot of healthy examples to show you, that's where you just go, you can't, when your family is your whole world and you're steeped in your family, my God, it's like, I think of that Greek, and Paul, if you quote this, I'm going to just put you on Jeopardy tomorrow, but where you're the Circe, I think it's the sirens that are singing and the soldiers just leap off the ship to, they have no thought of their own and they leap to the goddesses that are singing to them. And I think of that like with your family, they aren't trying to hurt you. Many families, some are obviously, but the protection of the family structure is like protecting life and death to an unhealthy family. And so when someone wants to leave that structure, my goodness, there is going to be some sirens singing to keep you jumping off that ship and running back to the very thing that is so unhealthy for you. And they're going to coddle you and they're going to stroke you and tell you, that's right, you should leave the good thing that's talking in your ear. And you have to be so strong to be like, nope, not going to do it. Not going to do it, especially when you have a child or children. And you don't want them to also be drowned into that family structure.
Yeah, it is. You're so right, Kristen. It is very difficult to not get pulled back into that. And you can expect, in my experience, you can expect difficulty not only from your family, but just kind of other things in life too, or all it seems like everything is going to push you back, because when there's that path of resistance, then it can be very difficult to break your own habits and break your own faulty thinking. I'm sitting here thinking about faulty thinking and how, Paul, you talk about how so much of our behavior is unconscious. And I think about that and think about how faulty thinking can just really it's so deeply rooted in your mind that you can't get to the other side of it. And one of the faulty things that I kind of had in my mind, and this was something else I've discovered by having my autistic son, is, I mentioned just having so much gratitude towards God for what I feel like he just picked me up out of the mire and put me on solid ground. And I felt indebted. So that was part of the reason why I was always doing things, because I felt indebted. And I felt like I could just never do enough to thank him for what he had done for me, when in reality, grace is free. But in my mind, that was what I thought I had to do. So that was very much caught up in my mind when I was dealing with these struggles I was having with being at home and not feeling useful. And I enjoy every moment I have with my son, but it just internally, I felt like I wasn't contributing. And, I was in prayer about it one night, and I felt like God just dropped this thought in my mind. And he was like, Melanie, all I want from you is your heart. Wake up every day and just give me your heart. That's all I want. And that right there was changed my whole perspective. And since that day, I feel like this faulty thinking that was going on in my head was just completely changed. So I guess as a clinician, that's something that could be addressed with CBT or, just some really good psychoanalytic therapy that kind of pushes you to that faulty thinking that can be so basic, but it literally affects every decision you make every single day. It's amazing how one little way of thinking can affect your behavior.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great big ships have just a little rudder.
Yep.
That's a fraction of the size of the ship. That determines what direction it goes in. And what seems like little decisions that we make can be big decisions that alter the course of our lives.
Absolutely. I remember when I think I was in my early 30s, and we had split off from my biological family when I was like 14. And so I hadn't spoken to anyone. And I was very close with my cousins and so on. But one of my cousins found my email somehow, and she reached out to me, and she was the one that I was closest to. And we started talking, and she had apologized for all kinds of things that I was like, look, we were kids. I mean, it's okay. Yes, they were horrific and I almost died, but we were kids. And man, the family structure in my family, after that email, I could feel it in the air. Her mom is going to come in because her mom has taken over the role of my grandmother as the keeper of all the family secrets and the dominator of the entire family. And like 2 days later, I got an email from her mother, my aunt, and just blasting my mom and blasting me. And it was all to establish control and reel my cousin back in. And I thought, oh, I don't want to be a part of this. It makes me sick. I'm not going to have my son anywhere near this, because I was fierce about protecting him. He had no contact with my family. And I thought, oh, how sad, because she was reaching out. There was a little glimmer, but it wasn't worth sacrificing myself and my child and the family I had created away from that mess to try to help pull her out of it. I just, blessed her on her way. And I said very firmly to my aunt, I did not invite you in this conversation. You are not welcome to comment about my life. And I don't want to hear what you have to say and what your crazy machinations are about what's going on with my mother. And I ended it at that. But I felt very sad that I just watched that pull of how brilliant a family in illness can pull you back into that illness.
Oh, yeah, it continues. I mean, Kristen, my grandmother just passed away, and I had not spoken or seen her since I was 17, except to get my mom's wedding photos from her one day, and that was just because I wanted my mom to have them. But anyway, so she just recently passed away, and of course, my mom, it's so weird because I had people reach out to me on Facebook to give condolences for her passing, which is just weird because I wouldn't know what to say. It's not like I'm going to type someone back and say, well, I didn't talk to her in 20 years, so I don't really care if she died.
Right.
What do you say? So I just kind of give this typical response like, oh, thank you so much, even though,
Thank you. Yeah.
like that's just a thank you. But my mom got lots of that, because it was her mother. And my mom's comment to family members was always, the mother that I thought I had died many years ago. I grieved her many years ago, and that was kind of the comment that she made. But yeah, it's so many things you don't think about, just awkward things you don't think about when you're dealing with those family dynamics and not having a relationship with family members. So you really just have to do what's best for you and listen to your gut and try to block out what everyone else is saying to you, or because if you're making a decision based on guilt or shame, it's never a God-driven decision in my mind.
Yes.
So it needs to be, a decision out of peace and truth, and we have to hold on to that. And that is something that I feel like has really helped me maintain my sanity, is knowing what the truth is and holding to that, and knowing that that was what I was standing by, and nothing was gonna pull me away from what I knew was to be true.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of people are very uncomfortable. Kristen, I wish I could remember that meme. It's this meme that I've seen on Facebook, and it's like 2 counseling booths, or like 2, lemonade stand looking things basically. And it's like lies are more comfortable than the truth. There's like one person standing at the truth booth, and then where the lies are, it's all these, like, it's out the door, and that's so true. It's so true. It's much harder to live and stand in the truth than it is to living in comfortable lives that make you comfortable. So
yeah, I think in some ways, Paul, you've probably seen this, and I know we're coming to a close, but I think in some ways, when you see someone in that situation, and it may not be that the family's all that horrible, or it's just become unhealthy for everyone, and the light is offered to someone to get out, and it's really their choice whether they're going to grab that light or they're going to make that light look dark in order to keep living in the lie. And you have to, as the bystander, you have to sit there. I mean, I would say, even as a counselor, as a friend, whoever, and say, have some compassionate detachment around that, and just say, okay, they're going to do what they're going to do, and God bless them on their journey.
Yeah. As a psychiatrist, I really believe that most problems that we have stem from our early childhood.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's 3 things that determine how we turn out: our genes that we inherit, in our environment, especially the early environment that we grew up in, and then the choices that we make, where we can overcome the genetic and the environmental things. We don't have time to get into genes a lot right now, but
next show.
I love dogs. I love dogs. Yeah, I love dogs, and I know you both love animals.
Oh, yeah.
If you study dogs, some dogs are like, I've got, my wife and I each have our own Yorkie, and Yorkies are just so extremely loving. And there's other dogs that will, just as soon bite you as lick you, and there's some dogs that are really good at some things, and dogs that are good at other things. And they have generational patterns that they inherit. And humans are like that there's some patterns that we inherit. And like, for example, extreme perfectionism can be a genetic thing. It can be a low serotonin level, can make a person more perfectionistic and self-critical, and have that sort of influence their family that they grow up in, and their family that they raise themselves when they become parent. And so if somebody that's a real obsessive compulsive comes to me as a psychiatrist, I not only would get them into counseling to help overcome some of that, but they might need medication to overcome. If it's extreme, then they take a serotonin medicine, and a month later, they're not perfectionists anymore. They're not hard on themselves. I have some patients that come from families that are paranoid, chronically paranoid, where they feel like people are out to get them, and they become controlling and condescending and things like that. And sometimes that's genetics. Most of the time when people have those patterns, it's because they learned them. But sometimes it's genetic, and they get on a dopamine medicine, and a week later, they're not paranoid anymore.
Oh,
so sometimes,
thank you.
Sometimes there's family patterns that are genetic too. It's just a minor thing compared to the environment. We've been spending this whole program talking about environmental things because they're the most important factors that affect us. And the choices, of course, that we make are the most important things out of those 3. But genes are a factor too. I just want to mention that.
It's so true.
Is a factor too.
It's so
Absolutely
true.
Is.
Oh, God, believe me, I have said to people I love, there is medication that could help you with that. Why do you not take it? just won't.
I say that all the time. My heart bleeds for people like that. I'm just like, why do you want to wake up one more day not feeling the best that you could feel? Like,
Absolutely.
why are you choosing to fight this on your own when you could have help? That just doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand.
I saw a patient today that thanked me. He thanked me because he spent his whole life trying to be perfect, and to the extent where he had to even walk, his steps had to go a certain direction, and he had to do things and, check the doors 4 times a night. And so he had obsessive compulsive disorder, but it affected his whole way of looking at himself, looking at life, looking at his kids. And I put him on a medicine that corrects that. And he came back and he just couldn't believe it. It's a month later, and he came back and said, my life has changed. My life has changed. And I don't do those things. And I don't even want to do those things. They're just, I forget to do those things now. And he was just delighted, that could make so much difference.
Absolutely. Better living through pharmacology, as I say, always.
Yeah, that's what I told him. I said, better living through chemistry. That was exactly what I told him. Better living through chemistry.
There we go.
Not everybody needs that. Most people don't need medication.
Right. Some of us do.
The vast majority of people don't.
I mean,
but about 25% do.
Yeah. And you know what?
And I'm one of them. I take medicine.
Same here. And you know what? I have friends where I'm like, I don't want to tell them that I'm not on Xanax anymore, because then they're going to feel guilty that they take Xanax. And I'm like, please, I'm not saying that that's what you need to do. I'm saying that I'm glad that I'm at a state in my life. I'm just celebrating me. I'm not shaming anyone else or saying that what I'm doing is better than what you're doing, whatever. But for me, it's important that I don't need to take Xanax to go to sleep at night. That's a milestone for me. So can we just celebrate that without it having some kind of shame effect on you? That can be interesting. That's a whole other show that we'll get into. Well, this was a good show. So thank you so much, Paul, for coming on and covering this one with us.
Yeah, enjoyed it. I always do enjoy it.
Yeah, we do too.
I love doing these programs.
So do we.
I look forward to it.
Same here. I'm like, it's Tuesday night, Melanie and Valerie. Woo, woo. Yep. And thank you, of course, Melanie.
Oh, thank you guys. Always. Love it. Always walk away feeling good.
Me too.
Probably, some little insight drops in my head before I go to sleep at night, usually. Seriously.
And then
it's always some little nugget.
Yeah, then we'll dream about it, and then we'll tell Paul about it so he can analyze it later.
There we go. Sounds like a plan.
And thank you to our listening family, because we have the 3 of us as hosts, and you as our listening, the thousands of people that download these programs. You're part of our family. Absolutely. We have a family dynamic too.
That's
and
right.
We appreciate you being part of the family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Man, do we get some awesome emails from people too. So listeners, thank you so much. And thank you, of course, for always tuning in to another edition of Mental Health News Radio. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Tune in next time for another engaging discussion on relevant mental health topics. If you have any questions about Meyer Clinics, please visit our website at meyerclinics.com. That's MEIER clinics.com, or call us at 888-7-CLINIC. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcast apps. And please note that we are a member of and produced by Mental Health News Radio Network, MHNRnetwork.com.